総員戦闘。戦闘機発艦。
that. I killed the destroyer.
Off to a great start.
Just delete his
damaged.
Bismarck.
The ship is on fire!
Problem solved, sir.
Our team has taken the lead.
Spotter airborne.
Well, now he's out of range because I can't see him. He's going at 1 knot. And it's annoying because you won't sail into my firing line.
Enemy cruiser sighted.
Well, I sure teach that mountain a lesson.
Enemy battleship sighted.
Spotter returning to ship.
Damn, spotter, get more fuel in your tank.
Victory is in sight.
That one's so lucky I can't get another shot at it. Come on, inch out there a little further. Now you want to. Fuck, he's back. Fine, then I'll just shoot at the end of the elevator. I destroyed one of his guns. He's only got one gun. He's only got one gun left. And he's shooting at the wrong ship. Come here, boy. You want some 16-inch? Give me that broadside. How did that not kill me? Get him, secondary guns. That Fuso is still alive?
Go down.
Another business. I killed your brother. No, we just won.
Smoke screen set.
Of deep water torps?
Demande d'appui.
ships.
Roger. Bestätige. Affirmative. Ich schulde Ihnen was. Nante Koto.
All forces, provide cover for that target.
In the fall of 1941, Halsey and the other American commanders have a wary eye on Japan. The Japanese have made several threatening moves in recent years, invading China and allying themselves with Germany and Italy to form the original Axis of Evil. The Empire of the Sun is anxious to expand its territories across Asia. The U.S. and her allies are determined to stop them. Attempts to negotiate with Japan have floundered, and American intelligence has intercepted ominous messages hinting at war. By November 27, 1941, talks with Japan have ceased. The following day, Admiral Halsey approves the issuance of a special order. Battle Order Number 1. Bill Norberg, a yeoman or clerk aboard the Enterprise, recalls some of the inspiring language from the order.
The things that I recall most clearly are the Enterprise is now operating under wartime conditions. Steady nerves and stout hearts are needed.
Steady nerves and stout hearts indeed. December 6th, 1941. Enterprise is 300 miles from Pearl Harbor. The Big E is due back at Pearl this evening. Lucky for Enterprise and her task force, Mother Nature has other ideas.
I die, you die with me, damn it.
We ran into a terrific storm. And we fairly well weathered that in the pretty good sized ship that we had.
That's an eye
Our little tin can destroyers were bouncing about like baubles on the water. They used up so much of their fuel that we had to slow down and stop and refuel them.
This twist of fortune will actually keep Enterprise and her task force from the far worse fate awaiting the ships docked at Pearl Harbor. Despite the storm, Enterprise still manages to launch 18 scout bomber planes on a routine reconnaissance mission on the morning of December 7th. But this morning will be anything but routine. 200 miles to the east, 353 Japanese warplanes are headed for a date with infamy. Enterprise crewman Sergeant Frank Graves has been temporarily assigned to a post on dry land. He's at machine gun school near the entrance of Pearl Harbor. History is about to happen, and he's got a front row seat.
I heard some strange engine sounds. I looked up and Right above the algaroba trees, probably not more than 75 feet in the air, were large Japanese three-seater torpedo bombers with a torpedo hanging on them. Single fire, one behind the other. And I started yelling jabs. Finally, I guess one guy decided to have some fun, and he opened fire on us. Hit the guy next to me.
Although Enterprise herself is not in the thick of the battle, Pearl Harbor provides a preview of the fearsome firepower the ship will soon be facing. In addition to their Zero fighter planes, the Japanese air arsenal includes the B-5N2 torpedo bomber, nicknamed Kate, with a top speed of 235 miles per hour and a crew of 3. The plane doubles as a high-altitude bomber. The aircraft that will prove to be the most deadly, sinking more Allied warships than any other in the Pacific War, is the D-3A-1 dive bomber, nicknamed Val. With a 2-man crew and a max speed of 240 miles per hour, the Val is capable of carrying 1 550-pound bomb and 2 130-pound bombs.
You can see the dive bombers working over Pearl Harbor. Later on, some high-level bombers came in Pearl Harbor, and I suspect that's the one to get to Arizona.
More than 100 miles out to sea, Enterprise receives word that something is happening in the harbor.
Something came over the radio. Pearl Harbor under attack. This is no drill.
When Admiral Halsey gets the news, he has just finished breakfast and poured his second cup of coffee. Halsey, the men around him, and the Enterprise herself are suddenly electrified.
We were pretty much aghast. It just seemed surreal that we could actually be at war right that minute after we'd been at peace just a minute or so before.
I think many of us grew up that morning.
Beyond the horizon to the east, the men of Enterprise's Scouting Squadron 6 approach Pearl Harbor and begin to notice that something is very wrong.
We could see the smoke billowing up from the island. And I said to the pilot, "What the hell is the Army doing holding maneuvers on a Sunday for?"
The true state of affairs is about to become very clear. The squadron's radios crackle with a frantic call from one of the pilots.
There was Clarence Dickinson. Now, he had a squeaky little voice that you couldn't miss him. For sake, shoot that son of a on our tail. He's shooting real bullets.
As Dickinson roars into the fight at Pearl, multiple enemy Zero fighters jump in. His rear seat gunner opens fire and downs one of the attackers. But finally, Dickinson's plane succumbs to the barrage of enemy bullets.
He didn't die. His gunner was killed, but he parachuted and he made it back and got to fly another plane just right away.
Dickinson may have survived, but the first tangle with the enemy has been devastating. 6 of the 18 planes Enterprise launched that morning are lost. And for 11 of her airmen, the first battle of the war will also be their last. USS Enterprise finally steams into its home port on the evening of December 8th, roughly 32 hours after the attack.
The ships were on fire. There was smoke everywhere. There was oil all over the water. I don't recall seeing any bodies floating around, thank goodness, but it was a nasty mess. It looked bad, it smelled bad. You could almost feel gloom and doom in the air.
They had fireboats and tugs in trying to put out the fires. The surface of Pearl Harbor was about maybe 3-4 inches deep with fuel oil.
Surveying the destruction, Admiral Halsey swears that when he's done, the Japanese language will only be spoken in hell. Halsey orders every able body on the ship, officer and enlisted alike, to help refuel and reprovision Enterprise as quickly as possible. It's a job that normally takes a full day of round-the-clock work. On this day, the men get it done in 7 hours.
For the USS Enterprise to roll into Pearl Harbor, see all that carnage, for them to do what they need to do, within 7 hours, turn right back around and get back out to sea. Most people would think that would be pretty amazing. I just think that it just shows the American spirit. That, you know what, okay, you did this to us, watch this. Here we come now.
The sneak attack on Pearl has crippled the American Pacific Fleet. 4 cruisers, 5 destroyers, and 4 auxiliary ships have been damaged or destroyed. None of the fleet's 8 battleships have been spared. 4 are sunken, and the rest have taken heavy damage. But by striking when none of the 7 U.S. aircraft carriers were in port, the Japanese made a critical mistake. And they know it. Starting now, Enterprise and her fellow carriers are at the top of the enemy hit list.
Of course, the Japanese wanted the carriers. Because first of all, they're taking out one of our ships. Then they're taking out airplanes. And they're taking out personnel all at the same time. So they're like killing 3 birds with 1 stone. They believe if they could knock out all of our carriers, that they could win this war hands down.
We knew that we were an awful big target.
Enterprise sails out of Pearl on Tuesday morning into a strange new world, where the threat of death looms just over the horizon.
I suspect every one of us probably would have had in our mind, why did this have to happen? But now that it has, what are we going to do about it?
When we went back to sea on Tuesday morning, for all we knew, we were right into the jaws of the Imperial battle fleet. So we were a bunch of scared sailors.
Understandably, tensions are high aboard Enterprise and within her task force. Fear of enemy submarines is pervasive. All eyes are open for them.
Someone spotted something they thought was a periscope, and of course the destroyer escorts opened fire on it. Dropped a few depth charges around. This thing kept bobbing up periodically. And they finally got up close enough to see what it was. Someone had lost a mop overboard somewhere during the line, and this thing was, the mop handle kept bouncing up toward the surface. And everyone was a little bit amazed about all the depth charges and ammo was wasted on that mop.
But the deep waters near Hawaii do conceal legitimate threats. December 10th, 1941. The Big E is on patrol near the Hawaiian Islands. Off to the south of the carrier, Perry Teff, a dauntless dive bomber pilot of the Enterprise's Scouting Squadron 6, spots enemy submarines at the surface. Submarines have to come up for air at least once every 24 hours in order to run the diesel engines that recharge their batteries. this morning, Japanese submarine I-70 is in Perry Teft's sights. Time for some revenge. The American pilot swoops in and drops a 1,000-pound bomb. The explosion rocks the Japanese submarine, damaging it and preventing it from diving beneath the surface. Sometime later, fellow Enterprise scout pilot Clarence Dickinson, the man who parachuted from his damaged plane at Pearl Harbor, takes another dangerous dive on I-70. Being a dive bomber pilot in World War II takes nerves of steel. Dauntless pilots execute this death-defying maneuver at 275 miles per hour with their canopies open so that they can bail out quickly if they're hit. To ensure the element of surprise, they take their dive at an insanely sharp angle of 70 to 75 degrees.
70-degree dive angle, World War II dive bomber. It's pretty dynamic. It's like your face is pointing at the ground. They hold you up by your feet. You just a little bit push forward. That's 70 degrees. And we don't have to dive at 70-degree angles today because technology has allowed us to do much less dynamic dive angles.
Dickinson plunges down towards the sub and finishes the job. Payback.
Yeah, baby, you want some fun?
It's the first enemy ship sunk by the U.S. Navy in World War II. And the kill belongs to USS Enterprise.
USS Enterprise, to get the first naval kill, had to lift the spirits not only of just the ship's crew itself, but all the American people. To show, you know what, we're not done. We're not even close to being done. Enterprise carries on with its patrol duties in the waters near Hawaii until late January 1942. Try as it might, the ship has no luck locating enemy planes and surface vessels near its home islands. The Japanese fleet has long since retired to distant waters. But even without the enemy in attack mode, life aboard ship remains perilous. Every time a plane takes off and lands on the carrier's deck, death is in the air.
Landing on aircraft carriers is always a difficult maneuver. Eventually, with enough experience, you get to the point where you can actually enjoy day landings. Night landings are always not enjoyable.
From the time of the very first carriers, the Navy set out to document any aviation mishaps, so that when mistakes are made, other pilots on board and across the entire fleet can learn from them. James Barnhill, the ship's bugler, is also a skilled photographer. One of his jobs is to film these death-defying takeoffs and landings.
I saw so many that would bounce and go over the side or came into one side of the flat deck or the other and go into the catwalk.
Did you want some fun?
If it looked like they were in trouble, then it started the cameras rolling. If it looked like it was a good landing, we didn't bother.
The pilots know that if they see the cameramen stand up and start rolling, it means they're probably heading for a rough landing.
They would just be sitting up there like vultures waiting to snap pictures of their crash. Back in the day, the pilots would call that area the vulture's nest. And that name stuck through today.
Now you only have a base of landing that is 400 feet long. You have 6 wires out there and you have to land on one of those wires. Of course you don't want to land on number 6.
I've only landed on modern aircraft carriers where we have 4 wires, and I can tell you when you miss the 3, and are headed to the 4th, get pretty close to the end of the carry, you always know when you caught a 4-wire. Now with the 6 wires that they had back in the World War II time frame, I imagine it was pretty simple. You knew when you caught the late wires. But really in pilot terms, we don't care what wire we catch, as long as we catch a wire.
February 1st, 1942. The days of training and patrolling are over. Time to take the fight to the enemy. Target, Wochi Island, Central Pacific, and the Marshall Islands chain. Objective, deny the Japanese a base for possible invasion of the Hawaiian Islands. Strategy, destroy Japanese airstrips, fuel storage tanks, ammunition dumps, and anti-aircraft batteries.
11,000
Enterprise's task force cruiser USS Northampton kicks off the attack. Her 8-inch guns hurl their 260-pound projectiles 5 miles across the sea to their targets on the island. Closing to within 3.5 miles, Northampton can now use her smaller 5-inch guns to assault the shore batteries.
They were firing shells over the Japanese shore batteries. And instead of hitting the shore batteries with direct hits, the shells were exploding over the shore batteries, and showering those positions with shrapnel.
USS Northampton is 600 feet long and 66 feet wide and displaces 9,000 tons. She has a top speed of 32.5 knots. With 9 8-inch guns, 4 5-inch rifles, 8 50 caliber machine guns, and 6 torpedo tubes, she is a force to be reckoned with. The island of Wochi is experiencing that force this morning. 100 miles west of Wochi, surveillance has revealed a heavy concentration of enemy vessels at Kwajalein Atoll. So while Northampton takes care of Wochi, Enterprise sends its SBD bombers to strike the Kwajalein anchorage. Dusty Cleese speeds south toward an outpost on tiny Kwajalein Island.
Bottom tier.
I found a cruiser there. So no fighters around. Oh boy, this is great. So I got up there and I made this dive.
Dive bombing is almost unheard of in modern warfare. Precision-guided bombs that can be deadly accurate from 40,000 feet have made this risky maneuver obsolete. But if you wanted to be sure of hitting your target in World War II, you had to get in close.
There's a lot of factors that come into dive bombing. Speed, dive angle, altitude of release, winds aloft. Clearly, the longer you wait to release the bomb, the closer into the target you're going to be, and the less all those factors can influence the bomb's trajectory. So in that respect, waiting is better. But you also got to be able to pull out of that dive bomb. And you also want to release the munition so that when it explodes, you're not caught in the frag pattern. So back then, typically released a bomb between 1,000 and 2,000 feet. Again, the longer you wait, the more accurate it's going to be, but also the faster you're going to be pulling out and the lower you're going to be pulling out. So it's kind of there's a happy medium in there somewhere.
As he dives down toward the Japanese cruiser, Cleese has just one bomb aboard, a 500-pounder.
He knew he had one shot only. Everything had to be perfect. And he did it.
Probably.
As he pulls out of his dive, Cleese is feeling pressure 5 to 6 times the force of gravity. But there's no better feeling than getting right up in the enemy's face and delivering a knockout blow. 5 miles to the north, a fellow Enterprise dive bomber pilot has discovered a cluster of merchant ships near the Carlos Pass. He scores a well-timed hit on a tanker scrambling towards the channel's mouth.
It was trying to go out at sea, and he hit it right on the head and caught it on fire.
The tanker just happens to be at the choke point of the channel, and it blocks passage by the remaining ships.
Well, here were all these ships inside of the lagoon.
Then the USS Enterprise launched 9 torpedo planes after it to go get those remaining ships that were caught inside of the channel.
Show yourself.
Practically no anti-aircraft gun, and here these things couldn't move. Well, it was like shooting fish in the barrel.
The torpedo bombers sent by Enterprise are Douglas TBD Devastators, slow, antiquated aircraft that will soon be replaced by more agile planes. With a sluggish maximum speed of 207 miles per hour and a feeble rate of climb of just 720 feet per minute, TBDs are overly vulnerable to both enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire. They carry a single 2,200-pound Mark 13 torpedo. The Enterprise TBDs pass over Kwajalein Lagoon and drop their payloads. There's not a single explosion. At this point in the war, American torpedo technology is hit or miss, and it's mostly miss. 9 out of every 10 torpedoes veers off course or fails to detonate. It's a frustrating reality for the pilots risking their lives at Kwajalein.
Monster torpedoes, not one hit.
Luckily, there are American bombers in the area too, and their explosives are working just fine. Kwajalein Harbor is a smoking, burning wreck by the time Admiral Halsey calls off the attack. Some 90 enemy personnel are killed at Kwajalein, including the area commander. The Marshall Islands raids are a huge success, and Enterprise returns to a hero's welcome at Pearl Harbor.
We were standing out there and cheering. I remember nurses waving towels. I remember some of the Army people holding their rifles up. And I remember one guy holding a mop,
18
and shaking that back and forth. They were so elated that somebody had whacked the
What is
enemy
this torpedo?
good and proper. And of course our sailors were manned
Did not
flight
order
deck by the
torpedoes.
hundreds. They were looking pretty spiffy up there. And as we passed the Nevada, those guys hollered out in unison, "Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray!" And our people responded, just unbelievably exhilarating. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! And it sounds kind of sophomoric at a time like this when you look back on it, but at that time it's just exactly what we needed.
The sailors and airmen of Enterprise will soon get yet another small taste of sweet revenge. Mid-April 1942. Sailors on the deck of the USS Enterprise notice that the air is getting chillier. They've been operating in the steamy South Seas for weeks, and now the brisk weather is making it very obvious that they're sailing north. But only the Admiral seems to know why. Tension aboard Enterprise is still high. At any moment, the calming sounds of the sea could be interrupted by the whine of a Japanese Zero or a torpedo broadsiding the ship. Up on the bridge,
Escort ships
Captain
go.
Yeoman Bill Norberg is working an all-nighter.
I was working my shift on the bridge at night. And it was a 12 to 4 o'clock in the morning shift. And I was out on the port wing of the bridge. And out there, it just so happened, the general quarters buzzer is out there. And I kind of nodded off, and my head was leaning back, and it hit the buzzer, and the thing went off. And of course, that means everybody jump out of your sacks, get your clothes on, get to your battle stations.
Around the ship, the crew jumps into action. Men roll out of bunks and grab their helmets. Crews ready their guns. But the skies remain quiet. Soon word spreads that this is a false alarm, and everyone aboard ship wants to know who triggered it.
And I heard somebody say, I don't know who it was, but he had a pea coat on. And that was me. And I took off, and nobody caught me. You know, sleeping on duty isn't the best thing you can do in time of war.
At roughly 6 a.m. on the morning of April 12th, the men of the Big E and her task force notice a completely unexpected sight in the distance.
I walked out from the comm shack on the walkway, and I looked over there, and I couldn't believe my eyes.
The surprise vessel is friendly. It's their sister carrier, USS Hornet, but she's carrying mysterious cargo.
There was something wrong with Hornet's silhouette. What was wrong with it is the flight deck was half covered with these big, strange-looking airplanes that were not painted Navy colors, and they weren't naval aircraft. They finally figured out they were B-25s, and they had Army camouflage painted on them.
The Army B-25s are here to make a bombing run on the heart of Japan. Target: Tokyo and other industrial centers around Japan. Objective: take out factories and munitions plants and demoralize the enemy by assaulting our homeland. Strategy: attack with 16 B-25 bombers launched from USS Hornet.
I don't like to use the word revenge, but sure. I mean, there was some revenge. That they wanted to get some back. You know, they were mad. And they weren't stand for it then, and we don't stand for it now. You know, you reach out and you hurt us, we're coming after you. And you know what? There ain't a damn thing you can do about it.
Army Air Corps Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle has agreed to lead the daring mission. And he's chosen the B-25 as the aircraft on which to trust his life. The North American Mitchell B-25B is a twin-engine medium bomber with a range, depending on bomb load, of about 1,300 miles. It's typically manned by a crew of 5 and can deliver up to 5,000 pounds of bombs. While other bombers have more range and power, the B-25's modest wingspan of 67 feet 7 inches will allow USS Hornet to fit more bombers on its flight deck. The plan is for the carrier to get Doolittle's bombers within striking distance of Japan. They will then launch, bomb Tokyo and their other targets, and continue on to land in friendly remote Chinese territory. Since Hornet's normal defensive aircraft must be stored below deck to make room for the Mitchell, Enterprise and her task force will go along to protect the Hornet if she is attacked.
We were all thrilled, but we were scared to death. We said, this is a suicide mission.
In order to ensure that Doolittle's bombers have enough fuel to reach the designated landing area in China, Hornet and Enterprise need to get the planes within 400 miles of the Japanese mainland. But bad luck intervenes.
We ran across this little, what we thought was a fishing boat. Turned out to be a patrol boat. We didn't pick it up on our surface radar, it was that small. Cruiser Nashville went out with her 6-inch battery and sank this thing. And we thought, well, maybe we got away with it. But Radio Pearl Harbor actually intercepted a message reporting warships.
So they had to launch, and they had to launch right then and there. There was no turning back.
carriers are 650 miles from the Japanese mainland. It means Doolittle and his men might not have the fuel to make it out safely. They choose to go anyway. At 8:20 a.m., on the cold, damp, and blustery morning of April 18th, 1942, the B-25 Mitchell bombers prepare for takeoff.
High wind, high seas, carrier racing 30 knots, pitching and bucking like a Bronco, about 25 knots headwind. Wind on the flight deck of the carrier is 55 knots.
The pilots have more to worry about than the weather. Carriers like Enterprise and Hornet weren't designed to launch planes this heavy. And this is the first time a B-25 has attempted to take off from a carrier in combat.
That aircraft wasn't designed to be taken off of an aircraft carrier, so they really had to get as much wind over the deck as possible because wind over the deck translates to flying speed off the angle.
Once the bombers are speeding down the flight deck, there's only two places they can end up. With enough speed, they'll be in the sky. Too slow, and they'll be in the sea.
Taking off in a high wind, high sea environment is always tricky. Your number one priority right there is going to be making sure that the aircraft is lifting off the end of the deck and the bow is high.
Making it even more difficult, the bombers have been stripped of all non-essential items to make room for more fuel and bombs. They're even heavier than usual. Colonel Doolittle himself is the first to go.
You got all these aircraft stacked up on the flight deck, so the first guys to take off have the least amount of runway.
Max is being very
Doolittle's
aggressive,
bomber struggles off the deck, but manages to stay airborne.
And the second one to go off almost dipped into the water. If I recall, there was one more plane that almost went in the drain. But all 16 of them got on their way.
Four hours after launch, the bombers finally reach their targets. Despite enemy flak, each plane drops 2,000 pounds of hell into the heart of the Japanese homeland. They then turn toward the Chinese coast and their designated landing area. But as the last drops of fuel funnel from the bombers' tanks, most of Doolittle's air crews have no choice but to bail out or crash land. Three crewmen perish in the process. 8 are captured by the Japanese. The physical damage done to Japan has been negligible, but the psychological impact is truly significant on both sides of the Pacific.
It was definitely a morale booster, not only for our servicemen, but for our whole country. At a time of war, when the enemy is getting nailed at the heart of their homeland, it makes you feel like, you know what? You try to stop us, it ain't happening. We're coming after you. It showed the Japanese that they weren't invincible, that we could reach out and we could touch it.
The first 6 months of the war have been a trial by fire for the crew of the Enterprise. In December of 1941, the men of the Big E were sailing the Pacific, unsure of what lay beyond the horizon. Now, they are well on their way to becoming a battle-tested fighting machine. Morale on board runs high.
We didn't look for the war to last very long. We just didn't think that the Japanese were that strong.
They thought that the war would be over relatively quick, and they couldn't have been more wrong.
Soon, the pilots and gunners from the Enterprise Task Force will will come face to face with the enemy again. And the course of the war will change forever in the massive and deadly Battle of Midway. Battle 360. Japan strikes Pearl Harbor, and America is at war. The aircraft carrier Enterprise leads the U.S. Navy as it strikes back. Now Enterprise is about to face the massive Japanese fleet at Midway. USS Enterprise, a fighting city of steel. She is the most revered and decorated ship of World War II. On this 360-degree battlefield, where threats loom, on the seas, in the skies, and in the ocean depths, the Enterprise's enemies could be anywhere and everywhere. There's nowhere to run when the war is all around you. Battle 360 USS Enterprise. Vengeance at Midway. This series is brought to you with limited commercials by the men and women of Enterprise Rent-A-Car. June 4th, 1942, 10:20 a.m. Bombers from USS Enterprise find their target in the middle of the Pacific. They are Japanese carriers Kaga and Akagi, part of an enormous Japanese fleet. Japanese Zero fighters have been distracted with earlier assaults. They tear apart the slower planes, but leave their home carriers unprotected. Perfect prey for the hunting dive bombers of Enterprise. 26-year-old Dusty Cleese spots his target, carrier Kaga.
Everything was ideal. We were up about like 20,000 feet, and they were coming towards us.
The spaceship
Cleese begins his dive, but all 32 bombers in the squadron plunge at exactly the same time, nearly causing mid-air collisions. To make matters worse, some dive too steeply.
Our plane is jerking around, and I don't know what's going on or why. My pilot had the throttle at the firewall just as hard as he could go. I could smell the water. He was just that close.
It is payback for Pearl Harbor, and it may be doomed before a single bomb is dropped. The overeager flyboys of Enterprise are looking for vengeance. They are diving into a trap. Flashback. The battle called Midway had actually begun 24 hours before. On June 3rd, 1942, USS Enterprise sails 900 miles from her home base in Hawaii, accompanied by fellow carriers Yorktown and Hornet. She is heading for a tiny American outpost on a remote atoll called Midway. 175 miles west, 4 Japanese carriers steam southeastward on a collision course. Imperial Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto plans to finish the job he started at Pearl Harbor.
The USS Enterprise is what the Japanese really wanted to take out. Yamamoto knew that if he could take out our carriers, they essentially would win the war.
The main force of Japanese ships headed toward Midway include 4 aircraft carriers: Kaga, Akagi, Soryu, and Hiryu. 7 battleships, 150 support ships, cruisers, destroyers, and tankers, 248 carrier aircraft, 16 float planes, and some 15 submarines. The American Armada is substantially smaller. 3 aircraft carriers, 50 support ships, 233 carrier aircraft, 127 land-based aircraft on Midway Island, and 8 submarines, outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, this is all that is left of America's Navy. The carriers were not present at the sneak attack, to Yamamoto's dismay.
He said, "We have no idea what we've done." He was definitely disappointed and worried.
Sinking those American carriers really became an obsession of Admiral Yamamoto's as the months after Pearl Harbor continued.
Those aircraft carriers come back to make a bit of a pain in the neck of themselves by attacking the Japanese in February at the Marshall Islands.
3 weeks later, the USS Enterprise strikes the Japanese force occupying Wake Island. And a week after that, Enterprise strikes at Marcus Island, just 1,000 miles from Tokyo. Then in April, Enterprise escorts USS Hornet in the Doolittle raid against mainland Japan. B-25 bombers launch from Hornet and drop bombs on Tokyo and several other cities.
Japanese realize the home islands are vulnerable, U.S. Navy aircraft carriers are still out there and are still dangerous. So what we need to do is get rid of their aircraft carriers and then set up one more outpost further out into the Eastern Pacific.
One carrier, Lexington, has already been sunk a month ago. And now, Admiral Yamamoto plans to lure the rest of them into a trap. He'll target Midway Island.
Midway is close enough to Hawaii that it will be seen as a threat to the security of Oahu and Pearl Harbor, and yet it's far enough away that American air power in the Hawaiian Islands can't really make its presence felt during the forthcoming battle.
The American fleet has also lost one of its best leaders. Vice Admiral Bull Halsey has kept the Navy afloat for 6 months on nothing but sheer guts. Now he is out of action, felled by a rare variant of psoriasis, so severe he is hospitalized, his very life threatened. Admiral Chester Nimitz is still in command of the Pacific Fleet. Nimitz, a Texas native and a 41-year veteran of the Navy, is a shrewd and efficient commander. And though Nimitz is outnumbered and outgunned, he has an ace up his sleeve. The Japanese Code. The U.S. Navy has worked round the clock to crack the Imperial Navy's code. They determined that the Japanese plan an attack on a target called AF. But what is AF? Washington bureaucrats insist AF is Alaska's Aleutian Islands, the beginning of an assault on the U.S. mainland. But Admiral Nimitz believes the Japanese want the Pacific, not Alaska. The codebreakers come up with a ruse. They broadcast a radio alert saying that Midway has a drastic water shortage. Within 24 hours, the codebreakers have their answer. The Japanese Navy sends a coded message reporting a water emergency on target AF. Nimitz is right. AF is Midway Island. Admiral Nimitz has evened up the odds. The Japanese Navy is arriving in full force. But the Americans will be waiting. For the U.S., it is a true 360-degree battle. Target, Midway Island. Objective, protect the American base and inflict as much damage as possible on the superior Japanese fleet. Strategy, ambush with air, sea, and sub attacks. Nimitz knows that the Japanese will approach Midway from the northwest. So he sends his aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, to a staging point 200 miles northeast of the island. When the Japanese carriers come within range, American bombers will attack. And all signs point to the 4th of June as the day the enemy ships will reach the battle zone. Dawn, June 4th, 1942. It's clear and quiet as USS Enterprise floats near the exact center of the Pacific. Scout planes search for the enemy carriers, but they are too late. Japanese bombers, Kates and Vals, get the first hit at Midway. A force of 109 Japanese aircraft appear over the atoll. They tear into the American base, exploding hangars and cratering runways. It is like Pearl Harbor all over again. Back with Enterprise and her task force.
Should I try ranked battles?
Sailors prepare for action. but haven't gotten word of the Midway attacks. Over on USS Yorktown, 21-year-old Oklahoma native Lloyd Childers, a radio man gunner, dressed alongside his brother Wayne. Childers had an odd sense that his chances of surviving his mission today were slim.
I put my wallet in my pocket, started to put my wristwatch on, and my brother was standing there. We were sharing a locker. I took my wallet out of my pocket, took the wristwatch, put it in the locker, and I said, Wayne, if I don't come back, these are yours. He got a funny look on his face, but didn't say a word.
The morning's ominous tone gets worse when they reach the mess hall. It's a hearty meal of steak and eggs, a sign to the airmen that real trouble is ahead. Dive bomber pilot Dusty Cleese is a 26-year-old Naval Academy graduate from Coffeyville, Kansas.
Now, we always knew that anytime we ever had steak and eggs, that was going to be a busy day.
Somebody behind me says, last meal for the condemned men.
7 a.m. Reports of the attack on Midway reach the Enterprise. The flyers scramble to prepare for their launch. In Enterprise's ready room, pilots shake hands with one another, many for the last time.
What's that about?
The ideal launch order is for the Wildcat fighters to climb into the sky first to protect the planes that follow. Then the torpedo bombers launch, followed by the dive bombers. Dive bombers are faster than the torpedo planes and can catch up. But it doesn't come off like clockwork this morning. Problems with plane jockeying on the flight deck cause delays. Some squadrons don't properly coordinate and become scattered.
The problem from the American standpoint is that at this point in the war, we really don't understand how to use our carriers in company with each other. So when the American carriers finally begin launching their aircraft, they put them up in such a way that you have squadron-sized groups going off and doing their own individual searches for the Japanese rather than putting together a coordinated strike with torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighter escorts.
SBD scout bomber pilot Dusty Cleese says goodbye to his friend Tom Eversole. Eversole pilots one of the slow, vulnerable torpedo bombers. His odds of returning from the battle are low.
He knew that he was on a suicidal thing, you know.
The torpedo bomber aircraft the men are flying, the TBD Devastator, is not a good airplane for the job.
In the torpedo plane department, the Americans have real deficiencies. It's underpowered, it's slow, it has to launch its torpedoes at very low altitude and very low speed.
Over on Yorktown, radio man gunner Lloyd Childers climbs into the back of his torpedo bomber, with his pilot, Harry Coral, up front.
When we were strapped in and everything ready to go, I picked up the mic and I told Mr. Coral, today's my 21st birthday. Theoretically, today I'm a man, so let's celebrate.
Moments later, Coral and Childers' TBD Devastator, lugging a 2,000-pound torpedo, roars down the flight deck and fights its way into the air. They'll have to fly nearly 2 hours to reach the Japanese ships. While the torpedo planes lumber into the sky, American forces have already begun the assault on the Japanese. 7:10 a.m. The first wave of the American attack begins. Bombers have launched from Midway Island to attack the Japanese carriers. The enemy warships open up with anti-aircraft fire. A typical Japanese aircraft carrier is bristling with weaponry. The Kaga, an important carrier in this fight, wields 5 8-inch guns that can reach out more than 10 miles. For medium-range work, it has 16 120-millimeter batteries, and for the close-in fight, 22 25-millimeter cannons. This anti-aircraft arsenal can unleash a murderous hailstorm of lead. 6 miles southwest and just under the surface, American submarine USS Nautilus scans the horizon. The sub is a scout for U.S. forces. Smoke from the Japanese anti-aircraft fire soon draws the attention of Nautilus. The sub moves closer, looking to make an attack of its own. But 180 degrees and some 800 feet overhead, a Japanese fighter plane spots Nautilus. The Zero swoops down to 200 feet and opens up with machine gun fire. Anything to damage the sub or force it below periscope depth, so it cannot fire a torpedo. 90 degrees and 2,000 yards off Nautilus's port bow, the Japanese destroyer Arashi spots the encounter. It charges in and starts dropping depth charges. A depth charge is an explosive device designed to sink a submarine with a powerful underwater explosion. A fuse set will activate at a predetermined depth, detonates the explosive. Now the hunt is on. With a speed of 35 knots and armed with 8 torpedo tubes and 26 depth charges, Arashi is a sub-killer. Depth charges don't have to be direct hits. The explosions are designed to rupture or crack the sub's hull. Even a minor crack can compromise a sub's safety and sink it. The explosions miss Nautilus, but the sub takes no chances and dives temporarily. The U.S. submarine soon resurfaces, though, and strikes back. It spots a battleship. She sets up her target, then unleashes her torpedo. The American torpedo misses its mark. But it's threatening enough that Arashi devotes the next few hours to stalking the submarine. This is a small encounter in a massive engagement, but the sub hunt will have repercussions that will turn the tide of battle and determine the fate of the fleet. 160 miles west, the Japanese continue to Midway. But at mid-morning, Japanese scout planes report the presence of the American aircraft carriers. The Japanese fleet immediately breaks from its southeasterly course and heads northeast toward the American warships. But the destroyer, Arashi, stays behind to continue hunting the U.S. submarine Nautilus. With Arashi in the area, Nautilus will not come near the surface for fear that the destroyer will detect it and drop depth charges. If the submarine cannot come near the surface, it cannot use its periscope to sight targets and take aim, so it cannot fire torpedoes effectively. In changing course, the Japanese carriers soon steam right into the path of 2 American torpedo bomber squadrons. The torpedo bombers of USS Hornet spot the enemy carriers first. All 15 TBD Devastators roll in for the attack. Most of the lumbering airplanes do not even get close. Swarming Zero fighters and flak from enemy destroyers and battleships send them crashing into the briny water below. A single pilot, Ensign George Gay, actually gets his Devastator close enough to drop his 2,000-pound torpedo. But it doesn't explode.
As he approached, he got a bullet in the arm. Then he released his torpedo, and then he was so close that he had to come up to go across the Japanese carrier. Just as he got over the Japanese carrier, his engine quit. So he splashed down on the other side. And he tried to get his gunner out, but he thought the gunner was dead because he had talked to him at one point and then he never heard from him again.
Over the next few hours, George Gay will stay afloat using his life raft as camouflage, the sole survivor. 15 torpedo bombers and 29 men from the Hornet are all lost in a single attack. Ensign Gay is in the water less than 20 minutes when the torpedo bombers of USS Enterprise reach the battle area. As they drop close to the water to begin their attack, they too slam into ferocious anti-aircraft fire and attacks from Zero fighters. Most go down. But 4 Enterprise torpedo bombers manage to escape the deadly barrage and will eventually make it back to the ship. Unfortunately, Tom Eversole, friend of SBD pilot Dusty Cleese, is not among the surviving air crewmen.
I always try thinking about it. He was my, very, very best friend, and he didn't come back.
But at this point in the battle, Dusty Cleese has more things to worry about. Dusty is part of a dive bomber group well behind the torpedo planes. Heading up Dusty's air group is Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, a 40-year-old Buffalo, New York native. He normally flies a fighter, not a bomber, and he's leading this group like a bat out of hell.
He was a fighter pilot. His whole idea was, it's the one that hits first is the one that's going to win. So we were going at 190 knots.
Dauntless dive bombers usually fly at 160 knots. At 190 knots, they may run out of fuel before they can return. Also among McCluskey's air group is Bruno Guido. Back in February, Guido's quick action and heroism diverted disaster when a suicide bomber targeted Enterprise at the end of the Marshall Islands raid. Guido scrambled from his catwalk battle station to the machine gun in the rear seat of a dauntless dive bomber parked on the flight deck. He opened fire on the Japanese suicide bomber, forcing it to crash. Also flying in the squadron is 19-year-old radio man gunner Don Hoff. He is still getting adjusted to life aboard the massive floating city called Enterprise. The enlisted men's quarters are deep in the bowels of the Big E. It's nearly 2,000 bunks, 4 deep, where Hoff got a rude awakening on his very first night.
My bunk was the bottom bunk, the one that was right on the floor. I was in there just in my shorts, and I woke up about midnight or so, and there was hot water that was splattering on me, splattering in my face, and I just hot on my chest, my stomach. Then I realized that I wasn't in a dream. I looked up there, and this guy is standing there urinating on me. He wasn't sleepwalking. He was one of the local squadron drunks. They pushed this guy, and he staggered on down there, still urinating. So that was my introduction, and I thought to myself, I wonder how long I'm going to be able to put up with this.
Now Hoff is in McCluskey's squadron, and they're in for a surprise. When McCluskey's bombers reach the point where the Japanese carriers are supposed to be, they see nothing but empty ocean.
We got out there, the sun was shining, and there were a few scattered clouds around, but you could see for a long ways, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing in the water.
The dive bombers are unaware that the Japanese fleet has changed course toward the northeast, heading not for Midway, but for their real prey, Enterprise and her sister carriers. McCluskey faces a dilemma. If he keeps going, his squad will run out of fuel.
We were getting right about the end of where if we have to continue to fly with a bomb load like this, we're going to have difficulty getting back. It was going to be close.
If he doesn't turn back soon, his men will probably have to ditch in the ocean with no guarantee of rescue. On the other hand, the enemy can't be too far away, and the damage his air group could do to those carriers might save a lot of American lives in the long run. McCluskey makes a gutsy choice. he keeps going, risking a crash landing for his entire crew, for a chance to find the enemy and destroy him. And the decision soon pays off. Within minutes, McCluskey spots a tiny white wake in the ocean below.
I saw McCluskey point out to the side, and I looked down there, and all I could see was what looked like a little tiny miniature ship down in the water.
It's the Japanese destroyer Arashi, the vessel that had been stalking the submarine Nautilus. It has given up its search and is now powering back to the fleet.
And that ship was not zigzagging, it was going at what they call flank speed, which means a big bunch of water coming up behind it. They were doing 35 knots or more, and he was heading straight.
McCluskey wisely decides that if I just follow this ship back, he'll probably take me back to the Japanese carrier task force.
McCluskey changes course and tails the Arashi. If the Enterprise flyers can keep from running out of gas, they may hit pay dirt. The Arashi points directly at the target, but before McCluskey gets there, another attack begins. The Japanese carriers are hit by bombers. Pilot Harry Coral and rear seat gunner Lloyd Childers buzz in with 13 other TBDs to drop their payloads. But Japanese Zeros intercept them in an instant. Zeros have a top speed of 330 miles per hour, a rate of climb of 3,100 feet per minute, two 20mm cannons in the wings. To make this agile Predator even more lethal, there are two 7.7mm machine guns in the engine cowling.
There was a Zero coming head on. He came right in a real steep bank over us. So I wanted to get a burst in, but I pressed the trigger. Gun was still on safety, didn't fire. And so I corrected that situation very quickly because there were several other Zeros in the area. And the best description that I can think of what it looked like was a bunch of bees attacking us.
Japanese Zero pilots are talented and disciplined flyers with years of experience.